Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the darkest stories stitch by stitch. Today we dive into the chilling tale of a man deported for killing his wife, a story of betrayal, secrets, and justice served. In the quiet suburbs of Austin, Texas, Miguel and Elena Rivera appeared to be living the American dream. They had moved to the United States from Mexico a decade earlier, carrying little more than hope and determination. Miguel, a skilled construction foreman, worked long hours to provide for his family, while Elena, a warm and dedicated kindergarten teacher, balanced her job with raising their two children, Sofia and Diego. From the outside, their life seemed idyllic. A modest but well-kept home, a close-knit community, and two children who excelled in school and sports. Friends and neighbors often spoke of the Riveras as a model immigrant family, proof that hard work and perseverance could lead to success. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Those who knew the couple well noticed subtle changes in Elena. Once vibrant and outgoing, she had become increasingly withdrawn. Her laughter, which used to fill the room, was now rare. She began to decline invitations to social gatherings, offering vague excuses about being tired or busy. Her colleagues at the elementary school started to worry when she showed up with dark circles under her eyes. Her usual enthusiasm for teaching dimmed. When asked if everything was okay, Elena would force a smile and insist she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. Miguel, on the other hand, seemed unchanged to most. He was still the hard-working, charismatic man everyone admired. At community events, he was the life of the party, telling jokes and sharing stories about his latest construction projects. But at home, a different side of him emerged. Neighbors would occasionally hear raised voices late at night, though the arguments were muffled and indistinct. Once, a neighbor saw Miguel storm out of the house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Elena had stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, watching him drive away before retreating inside. The children, Sofia and Diego, seemed to sense the tension but were too young to fully understand it. Sofia, the older of the two, began spending more time at friends' houses, while Diego threw himself into soccer, staying late at practice to avoid going home. Teachers noticed that both children seemed quieter than usual, but they chalked it up to the challenges of growing up. Despite the turmoil, Elena tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She continued to attend parent-teacher conferences, bake cookies for school fundraisers, and help the kids with their homework. But those closest to her could see the strain. Maria, Elena's best friend since childhood, grew increasingly concerned. She had known Elena since they were girls in Mexico and had never seen her so subdued. When Maria gently pressed her about what was going on, Elena would brush her off, saying it was just the stress of work and parenting. The truth was far darker. Behind closed doors, Miguel's temper was growing more volatile. Small disagreements would escalate into shouting matches, and Elena often found herself walking on eggshells to avoid setting him off. She confided in no one, not even Maria, fearing what might happen if Miguel found out. She had seen glimpses of his anger before, but now it felt like a storm brewing, ready to break at any moment. The couple's financial struggles only added to the tension. Despite Miguel's steady job, money was tight. Medical bills from Diego's recent appendectomy had drained their savings, and the stress of making ends meet weighed heavily on both of them. Miguel began to resent Elena's spending, even though it was mostly on necessities for the kids. Arguments about money became a regular occurrence, each one more heated than the last. By the time fall arrived, the Riveras' once happy home had become a pressure cooker. Friends and family could sense that something was wrong, but no one could have imagined the tragedy that was about to unfold. The perfect life they had built was about to shatter, leaving behind a trail of pain, betrayal, and unanswered questions. And as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the storm that had been brewing for years finally broke, changing their lives forever. On a cold November evening, the Rivera home was eerily silent. The usual sounds of laughter, clattering dishes, or the hum of the television were absent. The house, once filled with warmth and life, now felt hollow and foreboding. Elena had missed work that day, which was highly unusual for her. She was known for her dedication to her students, often arriving early and staying late to prepare lessons or help struggling children. Her absence raised immediate concern among her colleagues, who tried calling her multiple times but got no answer. Maria, Elena's best friend, grew increasingly worried as the day went on. She had spoken to Elena the night before, and while Elena had seemed quieter than usual, she hadn't mentioned anything out of the ordinary. Maria decided to stop by the Rivera house after work to check on her friend. When she arrived, the front door was locked, and no one answered her knocks. Peering through the windows, Maria noticed that the living room was in disarray, a chair was overturned, and a lamp lay shattered on the floor. Her heart racing, she called the police. Officers arrived within minutes and forced their way into the house. What they found inside was chilling. The living room showed signs of a struggle, with furniture knocked over and broken glass scattered across the floor. A trail of blood led from the kitchen to the master bedroom, where the scene was even more horrifying. Elena's body lay on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been stabbed multiple times, and the brutality of the attack was evident. The room was in chaos, with drawers pulled open and clothes strewn across the floor as if someone had been searching for something in a hurry. Miguel was nowhere to be found. His truck, usually parked in the driveway, was gone. Neighbors reported hearing loud noises coming from the house late the previous night, but had assumed it was just another argument. No one had thought to call the police. As investigators combed through the house, they found a kitchen knife lying near Elena's body, its blade stained with blood. They also discovered Miguel's fingerprints on the weapon, along with traces of blood on his clothing, which had been hastily stuffed into a trash bag in the garage. The search for Miguel began immediately. Authorities issued a statewide alert describing him as armed and dangerous. His photo was plastered across news outlets, and tips began pouring in from people who claimed to have seen him. Some reported spotting his truck on a remote highway heading toward the Mexican border, while others said they had seen him in nearby towns, looking disheveled and nervous. Despite the flood of information, Miguel remained elusive, slipping through the cracks of the manhunt. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation deepened. Detectives interviewed friends, family, and co-workers, piecing together the events leading up to Elena's murder. They learned about the couple's troubled marriage, Miguel's temper, and the financial strain that had been weighing on them. They also discovered that Miguel had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on Elena, naming himself as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy raised red flags, and investigators began to suspect that Elena's murder had been premeditated. Meanwhile, Miguel's family in Mexico claimed they hadn't heard from him and insisted he would never harm Elena. They painted a picture of a devoted husband and father, someone who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family. But the evidence against him was mounting, and the police were determined to bring him to justice. The case gripped the community, with many struggling to reconcile the image of the charismatic, hard-working Miguel with the brutal crime he was accused of committing. As the search continued, the Rivera children, Sofia and Diego, were placed in the care of relatives, their lives forever altered by the tragedy. The once bustling Rivera home stood empty, a haunting reminder of the life that had been shattered on that cold November night. And as the days passed, the question on everyone's mind remained: where was Miguel Rivera, and what had driven him to such a horrific act? Miguel's luck finally ran out in a small, dusty border town in Arizona, just miles from the Mexican border. For weeks he had been on the run, moving from place to place, always staying one step ahead of the law. He had abandoned his truck in a remote area, hitchhiked with strangers, and even slept in abandoned buildings to avoid detection. But the stress of being a fugitive was taking its toll. His face, once confident and charismatic, was now gaunt and unshaven, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught, but he clung to the hope that he could disappear into Mexico and start a new life. That hope was shattered one afternoon when he stopped at a rundown gas station on the outskirts of town. He was low on cash and needed food, so he decided to take the risk. As he walked into the small convenience store, the clerk behind the counter glanced at him, then did a double take. The man's eyes widened in recognition. Just the night before, he had seen Miguel's face on a true crime show, detailing the murder of Elena Rivera and the nationwide manhunt for her husband. The clerk kept his composure, ringing up Miguel's items as if nothing was wrong, but as soon as Miguel left the store, he called the police. Within minutes, the gas station was surrounded by law enforcement. Miguel, unaware that he had been recognized, was sitting in a corner of the parking lot, eating a sandwich from a vending machine. When he saw the police cars approaching, he froze for a moment, then bolted toward the back of the building. Officers shouted for him to stop, but Miguel kept running, his heart pounding in his chest. He ducked into a storage room, hoping to find a way out, but the room had no windows and only one door, the one he had just entered. Trapped and desperate, he tried to hide behind a stack of boxes, but it was no use. The police stormed in, guns drawn, and within seconds, Miguel was on the ground, handcuffed and subdued. Back at the police station, Miguel was interrogated for hours. At first, he denied any involvement in Elena's murder, claiming he had been out of town on the night of the killing. But as the detectives presented him with the evidence, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, the blood-stained clothing, the life insurance policy, his story began to unravel. Finally, he broke down and confessed, though his version of events was far from the truth. He claimed that Elena had attacked him with a knife during an argument, and he had acted in self-defense. He painted himself as the victim, a man pushed to the brink by a volatile and unstable wife. The detectives, however, weren't buying it. The crime scene told a different story, one of a brutal, one-sided attack. There were no defensive wounds on Miguel's body, and the sheer number of stab wounds on Elena's body suggested a frenzied, uncontrollable rage. The prosecution built a strong case against Miguel, presenting evidence of his controlling behavior, his financial motives, and the calculated steps he had taken to cover up the crime. The jury deliberated for less than a day before delivering a guilty verdict. Miguel was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a decision that brought a sense of closure to Elena's family and friends. But even as Miguel was led away in handcuffs, questions lingered. Why had he done it? Was it really about money, or was there something darker at play? And what about the life insurance policy? Had he planned the murder all along, or was it a spur-of-the-moment decision fueled by anger and desperation? The answers to these questions would remain elusive, buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. For now, justice had been served, but the scars left by Elena's murder would take far longer to heal. And as Miguel began his life behind bars, the story of what really happened that night in the Rivera home continued to haunt those who had known and loved Elena. Just when it seemed the case was closed, a shocking twist emerged that would reignite the investigation and cast new doubt on Miguel's guilt, or at least the extent of it. A year into Miguel's prison sentence, a letter arrived at the district attorney's office. It was from a man named Carlos Mendez, a former cellmate of Miguel's who had recently been released. In the letter, Carlos claimed that Miguel had confessed to him in startling detail, but not about acting in self-defense. Instead, Miguel had allegedly admitted to hiring a hitman to kill Elena. According to Carlos, Miguel had orchestrated the entire crime, planning it meticulously to make it look like a burglary gone wrong. But something had gone awry, and Miguel had been forced to step in and finish the job himself. The letters sent shockwaves through the legal team and law enforcement. At first, they were skeptical Carlos had a criminal record and a reputation for being untrustworthy. But as they dug deeper, they began to uncover evidence that supported his claims. Phone records revealed several calls between Miguel and a known criminal named Victor Torres in the weeks leading up to Elena's murder. Victor, a small-time thug with a history of violence, had disappeared shortly after the killing and was now believed to be hiding in Mexico. Detectives also discovered that Miguel had withdrawn $10,000 from his savings account just days before Elena's death, a sum that matched the amount Carlos claimed Miguel had paid the hitman. The investigation took on a new urgency. Detectives tracked down Victor's associates, hoping to find someone who could lead them to him. They learned that Victor had bragged to friends about a big job he had been hired for, though he hadn't provided details. One of his former girlfriends recalled him mentioning Miguel Rivera's name in passing, though she hadn't thought much of it at the time. Armed with this new information, authorities issued a warrant for Victor's arrest and began working with Mexican law enforcement to track him down. Meanwhile, Miguel's legal team scrambled to respond to the new allegations. They argued that Carlos's letter was unreliable, pointing out that he had a history of lying to authorities in exchange for leniency. They also questioned the timing of the letter, suggesting that Carlos had fabricated the story to gain favor with prosecutors. But the evidence was mounting, and the public's interest in the case was reignited. News outlets ran headlines about the possible conspiracy, and true crime podcasts dissected every detail, speculating about what had really happened that night. The breakthrough came when Victor Torres was finally apprehended in a small Mexican village. Under intense questioning, he confessed to his role in the crime. He admitted that Miguel had hired him to kill Elena, promising him $10,000 in exchange. The plan had been to stage a burglary, making it look like Elena had surprised an intruder. But when Victor arrived at the house, Elena had fought back, and the situation had spiraled out of control. Victor claimed he had panicked and fled, leaving Miguel to finish the job. His confession matched the details in Carlos's letter, and the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. With this new evidence, Miguel was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and his sentence was extended to life without parole. The revelation stunned the community, which had thought the case was settled. For Elena's family, the news was both a relief and a fresh wave of grief. They had always suspected that there was more to the story, but hearing the details of Miguel's cold-blooded planning was devastating. The children, Sofia and Diego, now teenagers, struggled to process the betrayal. Their father, the man they had once looked up to, had not only killed their mother, but had planned her murder in chilling detail. The case of Miguel Rivera became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil often hides behind a mask of normalcy. And while justice had been served, the scars left by Elena's murder would never fully heal. The story of her life and her death would continue to haunt those who knew her, a tragic reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. Years after the trial and the shocking revelations that followed, Miguel Rivera's story took one final, unexpected turn. By this time, he had spent 15 years in prison, a shadow of the man he once was. The once burly construction foreman was now frail and gaunt, his spirit broken by years behind bars. His health had deteriorated rapidly, and he was diagnosed with a terminal illness that left him with only months to live. It was under these grim circumstances that the U.S. government made a controversial decision. Miguel would be deported to Mexico, his home country, to live out his final days. The decision sparked outrage among many, including Elena's family and friends. They argued that Miguel should remain in prison, where he could face the consequences of his actions until his last breath. Deporting him, they felt, was a way for him to escape true justice. but the government cited the high cost of his medical care and his declining health as reasons for the move. Miguel, they argued, was no longer a threat to society, and deporting him would save taxpayers money. It was a cold, bureaucratic decision, one that left little room for emotion or moral consideration. Miguel was flown to Mexico under heavy guard, his wrists and ankles shackled as he boarded the plane. He was taken to a run-down hospital in his hometown, a place far removed from the life he had once known. The hospital was underfunded and overcrowded, a stark contrast to the facilities he might have had access to in the U.S. His room was small and dimly lit, with peeling paint and a single window that looked out onto a dusty courtyard. It was here, in this bleak and lonely place, that Miguel would spend his final days. Despite his circumstances, Miguel showed no remorse. When questioned by a local journalist who had tracked him down, he maintained his innocence, repeating the same story he had told years earlier, that Elena had attacked him and he had acted in self-defense. He spoke of his children, Sofia and Diego, with a detached coldness, as if they were strangers, rather than the son and daughter he had once claimed to love. When asked if he had any regrets, he simply shook his head and looked away. Sofia and Diego, now adults, wanted nothing to do with their father. They had changed their last names, cutting all ties to the man who had destroyed their family. Sofia had become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping families in crisis, while Diego had joined the military, seeking structure and purpose in the wake of his mother's death. Both had struggled with the trauma of their childhood, but they had found ways to move forward, determined not to let their father's actions define their lives. When they learned of Miguel's deportation, they refused to visit him, saying they had already mourned the loss of their parents long ago. As Miguel's health continued to decline, he was left alone with his thoughts. The hospital staff, overworked and underpaid, had little time to spare for a man who had committed such a heinous crime. He spent his days staring at the ceiling, his mind drifting between memories of his past and the grim reality of his present. The life he had once dreamed of, a life of success, love, and family, was now a distant memory, replaced by the cold, hard truth of his choices. In the end, Miguel died as he had lived in his final years, alone and unrepentant. His passing went largely unnoticed, a quiet end to a life marked by violence and betrayal. For Elena's family and friends, his death brought a sense of closure, but it did little to ease the pain of their loss. The scars left by Elena's murder would never fully heal, a permanent reminder of the darkness that had touched their lives. The story of Miguel Rivera serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of violence and the fragility of trust. It is a tale of secrets and lies, of a life built on a foundation of sand that crumbled under the weight of its own deception. And while justice was served in some form, the true cost of Miguel's actions can never be measured. It is a story that will linger in the minds of those who hear it, a cautionary tale of how easily the American dream can turn into a nightmare.